Okay, in the previous video, we took a look at, or I introduced you a little bit to Hobbes' text itself. We went through the introduction here and we discussed the parallelism he puts between God's creation of men and man's creation of the Leviathan, which is a man which is composed of all other men in the commonwealth or in the state. And we saw that he goes into quite a bit of detail with this parallelism. Also, I pointed out that in the parallelism are some features that particularly reflect Hobbes' way of looking at the state. So he sees the king as the soul, what governs and moves and makes the body living. He also talked about the main purpose of the Leviathan, its business being the safety of the people. One particular point that we saw was that he sees reward and punishment as the ways in which the sovereign directs and moves the parts of the body. We'll see that Hobbes's conception of a government is essentially a party, group of people who are given the power to punish and reward in order to keep the peace. This is when you see this in the context of the English Civil War and the idea from that Hobbes had that the only thing worse than a bad government is no government at all. We can see that for him, the government is its primary function is to keep people from degrading into a state of civil war. I'm sure many people in the Lebanese government after the end of the Civil War themselves thought no matter how bad the state we are now creating is, no matter how many problems it has, it must be better than the all-out mayhem, destruction, and massacre that one finds in a state of civil war, or what Hobbes will, more or less, for Hobbes is the same as a state of nature. For this reason, we have this idea that civil war for the Leviathan is death. Right? This will mean that later, when Hobbes is considering the power of the king, it will be absolute power. There is no good justification for a state to ever overthrow its king and to fall into civil war. Now, what we'll talk about in this video is just the first section of the text, which covers two things. First, we're going to see Hobbes's method. It's very, very simple. As we saw before, it's going to be deductive method. That's kind of, you'll see that play out throughout the text, his use of the deductive method. But he's going to have, just like Descartes did, Descartes used the deductive method as well, but he had this first moment of isolating clear and distinct ideas, and it was then with those ideas that, as one's principles, that one could then go on to perform a deductive system. Hobbes does not have the same idea of clear and distinct ideas as Descartes. He completely rejects Descartes' approach to the principles of knowledge and of political science. So we'll see he has a different method here. All right, and that's what he talks about just after outlining the parts of his work. It's a bit difficult. As I said, Hobbes is a difficult author to read because he wrote in English. You'll notice this is very unusual English. So hopefully my taking you through this will clarify a little bit of what's going on. So you really have to isolate a few parts and a few parts of the sentences and kind of build around there and interpret from around them. So the first clue to what's going on in these next few passages, which is not at all obvious, is that this is where he is laying out his method. So he says, concerning the first, there is a saying much usurped of late, misused of late, that wisdom is acquired not by reading of books but of men. So this is the principle he's going to put forward as the basis of his method. We should read men, but he's going to tell us, well, how do you read men? So what does it mean, read men? He means in order to understand a commonwealth and to do a scientific deductive approach to government and to political power, one must begin with a knowledge of men. Of course, this sounds a little bit like Alexander Pope. The primary study of man is man himself. In Bruno, this idea of turning towards oneself. But here he's saying in political theory, one must understand men, first of all. Don't read books. Don't read Aristotle. Read men. Men are the matter and the maker of the Leviathan. So we must have a systematic understanding of the nature of men first. So he says some things that are difficult to figure out here, but aren't important. He goes on and says, by which they might learn to truly read one another if they would take pains. And that is, so he's offering another statement of this principle of reading men. He says, how do you read men? You read them by reading oneself. Right? This is an ancient saying, know thyself. You've probably heard it before. Read thyself, know thyself. Nosce te ipsum. Yeah? Know thyself. But he says there are a couple of ways in which people have misunderstood what this could mean. Here's what it really means, know thyself. And this is how knowing thyself will be the key to understanding men. He says, but to teach us that for the similitude of the thoughts, the similitude, the likeness of the thoughts and the passions of one man to the thoughts and passions of another, whosoever looketh into himself and considereth what he does, then he does think, when he does think upon reason, hope, fear, and upon what grounds, that person shall thereby read and know what are the thoughts, passions of all other men upon like occasions. Okay, it's a bit complicated. You have to read kind of right through the semicolon. So to learn, to teach us, for us to learn how the thoughts of one man are similar to the thoughts of another, what one needs to do is to consider oneself and what one does when one thinks, opines, reasons, hopes, and fears, and upon what grounds one does these things, and thereby you will know what are the thoughts of other men on like occasions. So in other words, if you want to know men in general and other men and how they are similar to you, first you need to know yourself. You need to turn to yourself and you need to consider, what do you do when you think? What do you do when you have an opinion? What do you do when you reason? What do you do when you hope and when you fear? And why do you fear things? Why do you hope for things? Why do you reason about things? And if you consider these things, then you will begin to understand other human beings. You might say, well, isn't that obvious? Well, we can see this comment from Hobbes from two perspectives. First, he's saying this is again, just like previous thinkers we've seen, don't go to the books. Don't look for political theory in Aristotle or in the medieval church books on these topics. Don't read the Bible to learn about man. Look within yourself. Look at what you actually do. And the underlying assumption here is, think of other men like you think of yourself. Don't think of them higher than yourself. Don't think of them as lower than yourself. Don't assume that all human beings are good and that you are the only person who has bad thoughts. If you have bad thoughts, then probably every other person does. We tend to think of ourselves as different from other people, and to think of ourselves not as the average or as a representative. We think of ourselves as worse, better, and so on. And he's saying don't do that. If you see things in yourself that you do not like, those are in other men as well. If you see things that are high and great, they are in other men as well. If you have fears, don't assume you're the only person that is driven by those fears. And in this way, we'll have a kind of very commonsensical foundation for building our understanding of political theory. Now, of course, he understands a lot of these ideas and say reason. He says, consider what you do when you reason. But what he will consider reason, hope, and fear and thinking to be, is of course, also driven by his mechanistic theories. And we'll see this as we go through. But this is what he says about method here, right? Essentially, the method is know thyself, and by knowing thyself, you will know other human beings. He goes on here to explain in this little passage, he doesn't mean know thyself by thinking about the things that you fear or the things that you think about, but rather separating off the objects that you are involved with, because those are different from other people. Those are truly different. What isn't different between human beings, and what you find in yourself that will be like others, is things more general, like the desire, the fear, the hope, and so on. These things do not differ, according to him, from human being to human being. What differs is the objects of those things, and maybe their degrees and so on. Right? So he's saying, don't look into oneself, don't look at what you particularly like to understand how people like things. Right? You have to separate off that and think of liking in general. Okay, I'll read this passage. And though by men's actions we do discover their designee sometimes, so sometimes by considering the actions of men, we understand those men, yet to do it without comparing them with our own actions and with our own self, and distinguishing all circumstances by which the case may come to be altered, so getting rid of those particular distinguishing features which are inessential, is to decipher without a key, right? A cipher, a kind of code, and he says it's like having a code but having no key by which to decipher that code. And to be, for the most part, deceived by too much trust, by too little diffidence, as he that reads is himself a good or evil man. So you think of things out of proportion. Okay. This is the king, he that is to govern a whole nation, must read in himself not this or that particular man, but mankind. Right? This is again the general idea of what a man is, which though it be hard to do, harder than to learn any language or any science, yet when I shall have set down my own reading orderly and perspicuously, the pains left another will be only to consider if he also finds not the same in himself. Again, the strategy isn't so different in some ways from Descartes, right? I looked within myself. I hope that when you look into yourself and you follow my method, you will find something similar. Hobbes is saying, if I have done this correctly, if my treatise is well written, then I have correctly looked into myself and isolated those things that are common to all mankind. And that will make it easier for you. Because although this is extremely difficult to do, harder than any language or any science, looking into oneself in the correct way and isolating the right universal and general characteristics of human nature, you won't have to do that. You'll only have to verify by looking into yourself, verify what I've already given you the key to. It says, for this kind of doctrine admitteth no other demonstration. So demonstration will be based upon those principles that we find within ourselves. Okay, so chapter 2. So this chapter, and this is the extent of this video, is I'll take you through this next chapter, which is essentially Hobbes outlining the state of nature, right? The natural condition of mankind, concerning their felicity and their misery, right? So we'll just read through and we'll interpret this. Nature hath made men so equal, there's that word equal, right? Told you to look out for that. So equal in the faculties of body and mind, as that, though there be found one man sometimes manifestly stronger in body or of quicker mind than another, yet when all is reckoned together, the difference between man and man is not so considerable as that one man can thereupon claim to himself any benefit to which another may not pretend as well as he. For as the strength of body, the weakest has strength enough to kill the strongest, either by secret machination or by confederacy with others, so forming a group with others that are in the same danger with himself. So what is Hobbes saying here? He says, in a state of nature with respect to the body and mind, right? So both body and mind, human beings are essentially equal. Now, what does equality mean here? Well, we can see. By equality, he does not mean, as you and I would say, we are equal. We have equal rights. You have no right to take my things. I have no right to take your things. I have the right to work and get a job and to go to the bank, and the state protects me. And when you harm me, the state protects protects me and punishes you. And if I hurt you, the state protects you and punishes me. We are equal politically. That's not what Hobbes is saying here. That's not his conception of equality whatsoever. His notion of equality is in terms of physical characteristics of the mind and the body. Strength, right? Two human beings are not equal in terms of strength, right? If you go to the gym all the time, you're much stronger than I and many other people are, possibly. But Hobbes says, more or less, we're equal. So we're not actually equal. He's not talking about complete equality. He's saying no one of us is so strong that even the weakest among us couldn't kill them, right? If I even no matter how weak I am and no matter how strong you are, if I catch you while you're sleeping, or if I sneak poison into your drink, you will die, and your strength will have been no use to you. So although you are stronger than me, in terms of our bodies, we're roughly equal, because either one of us could kill the other. Or if we need, then we could, at least three of us weaklings could get together and kill you, right? So there is no one, in other words, no one is so strong physically that they're invincible and that they can depend on themselves alone, all by themselves, without fearing constantly that they could be attacked by others and killed. So any one of us, no matter how strong we are, none of us are like giants that could dominate the world. Of course, for Hobbes, this is how odd his political theory is. If there was one of us who was like that, who was strong enough to conquer all the rest and take everything they had and kill them, then that would be just fine, and that would be the end of this book. But the principle that his book starts with is that, no, that's not the case. This creates a problem, because we're all essentially equal, meaning none of us are monstrously stronger than anyone else. We end up competing with each other, and that's why a government becomes necessary. If you were so strong to kill everyone else, there would be no competition and no need for government. The same thing holds for mind. Right? By mind, he means strength of reason, the ability to calculate, to be clever, to be quick of mind or body, right? And no one is, he says, even more so than in physical strength, we are even more closely matched and therefore equal in mind, right? So let's read, with that explanation, let's read this passage a little further. Though there be found one man sometimes manifestly stronger in body or quicker than mind than another, yet when all is reckoned together, the difference between man and man is not so considerable, that one can thereupon claim for himself any benefit to which another may not pretend as well as he. As for the strength of the body, the weakest has strength enough to kill the strongest, either by secret machination, poison, or by confederacy, forming a group with others that are of the same danger as himself. As to the faculties of the mind, I find yet a greater equality among men than that of strength. So he goes on to explain what he means by intelligence, wisdom, prudence, and why that backs up this claim that human beings are even more equal in terms of mind. His idea is that intelligence is nothing but experience. So there's no sort of like innate capacities that some men have that others do not have. No, He says, "For prudence is but experience, which equal time equally bestoweth on all men in those things they equally apply themselves to." So all knowledge, intelligence is the product of experience. This explains why he talked about, he compared the counselors and the state to memory. Because knowledge, intelligence is just remembering previous experiences and drawing conclusions from them. So to be a counselor to the king is to be wise, but wisdom is really just having experience. So it's like having a good memory. That which may perhaps make such equality incredible is but a vain conceit of one's own wisdom. So why do we not think it's true that people are equal in mind, essentially? He says it's because people are vain. You think you're smarter than everyone else. But guess what? Pretty much all men are happy. No one thinks of themselves as stupid. Everyone is happy and think they have the greatest degree of intelligence. All men but themselves and a few others, whom by fame or by concurring with themselves they approve. For such is the nature of men, howsoever they may acknowledge many others to be more witty, or more eloquent, or more learned, yet they will hardly believe there be many so wise as themselves, for they see their own wit at hand, and other men's wit at a distance. Now, from this equality of mind and body, he says, arises the equality of hope in attaining our ends. In other words, because we see everyone else around us of more or less equal power and equal intelligence, we therefore think that we have equal hope of gaining things, right? We have just as much ability as others to get the things that we want, our ends. And therefore, if any two men desire the same thing, which nevertheless they cannot both enjoy, they become enemies. Very, very important claim here, right? You can see Hobbes' conception of human nature present. There's equality between us. Because of that, we estimate that we have the ability to get certain things. Whenever we meet another human being that wants that same thing, the food, the apple hanging on the tree, we both can't enjoy it, so we become enemies. And in the way to their end, which is principally their own conservation and sometimes their delectation only, endeavor to destroy or subdue one another. So it's our own preservation as human beings, our lives. That's our main end. And in pursuing that, we come into competition with others, and we endeavor to destroy and subdue others. So life in the state of nature, in the natural condition, is one of competition and one of mutual enmity and warfare. We'll see he'll actually say that later. And from hence it comes to pass that where an invader hath no more to fear than another man's single power, if one plant, sow, build, or possess a convenient seat, others may probably be expected to come prepared with forces united to dispossess and deprive him, not only of the fruit of his labor, but also of his life or liberty. And the invader, again, is in like danger of another. So he's saying every human being in this natural condition is subjected to the same logic, as it were. Each one wants to pursue his own ends, sees that the other human beings around him can only offer their own individual power as resistance. And so he believes he has a good shot, right? And so in that situation, anyone who plants or sows or builds or possesses a nice home can expect other people to come and try to take it from him because they have more or less equal ability, and so they can expect that they have good possibility of success, particularly if one or two can band together against a single individual. And he can expect that others will deprive him of the fruit of his labor, but even also perhaps of his life and of his freedom. And here's a key point, which I didn't highlight, but I should. And anyone who does this is themselves also in that danger. Every person in this natural condition is subjected to the same dangers and the same hopes. Everyone tries to defeat everyone else and can expect everyone else to be attacking them for the same reason. And from this diffidence of another, there is no way for any man to secure himself so reasonable as anticipation. Diffidence here, it's a funny word. It means kind of fear from other people, fear of other people, the worry that they will attack you. And because of this, you can never fully anticipate what they might do, and one is always fearful. That is, by force or wiles to master the person's all men he can, so long as he see no other power greater enough to endanger him. And this is no more than his own conservation requireth, and is generally allowed. Also because there be some that, taking pleasure in contemplating their own power in acts of conquest, which they pursue farther than their security requires, if others, that otherwise would be glad to be at ease within modest bounds, should not by invasion increase their power, they would not be able long time by standing only on their defense to subsist. And by consequence, such augmentation of dominion over man being necessary to a man's conservation, it ought to be allowed him. So what is he saying here? It is, I will not deny the English here is very difficult. He's saying from the fear of others and the fact that we cannot fully anticipate how they might attack us, just as they may not anticipate how we might attack them, what kind of force, what kind of tricks might be used to master other people when there is no greater power amongst us to stop that. And adding to the fact that some people will try, just out of the pleasure of conquering others, to conquer as much as they can. Taking all that into account, an individual must think that the only way to survive is by themselves trying to play this game as well as possible, meaning to conquer as much and to get as much power over other men as possible. And since this is the state, each individual against each individual, and everyone can expect the same from everyone else, then dominating, killing, stealing from other human beings ought to be allowed him, right? It is perfectly right. It is part of your right in a state, in a natural condition, to do whatever you wish. This, you can see, now the natural condition, one way of understanding that is as a condition that perhaps existed before there were states. But it's also the state into which we would fall should the government cease to exist, so in a state of civil war. So in civil war, this would be similar. Anything is allowed. There are no laws, there are no rules. Every human being against every other human being. The only way to survive is to fight for oneself. And so one should be allowed any means to do so. Again, men have no pleasure, but on the contrary, a great deal of grief in keeping company where there is no power able to overawe them all, right? So there is no pleasure in living with other human beings if there is not a power that can control all of them and keep them all in check. For every man looketh that his companion should value him at the same rate he sets upon himself, and upon all signs of contempt or undervaluing natural endeavors, as far as he dares, to extort greater value from his contemners by damage or from others by example. So here he's turning to a slightly different theme. Everyone wants not only to pursue their own ends, and perhaps the pleasure of simply conquering others, but we also want others, our companions, to value us, right? In the same way that we value ourselves. And if others do not value us, do not honor us in the way we feel that we should be honored, then we try to extract that honor either by damaging them, making them fear us, in other words. We get honor from others by intimidation, or by example, by showing them what we can do, all right, showing them our power. And here he sums it up. So that in the nature of man, we find three principal causes of quarrel. So in the nature of man, all human beings, all times, not just in England, all human beings, by their nature, he believes, have three sources of competition that lead them into war or quarrel. First is competition, right? Competition for the goods that are required to preserve ourselves. Secondly, diffidence. This is this fear of being attacked by others. And thirdly, glory. So oddly, glory is this last one, to get honor, prestige, to impress. Competition has to do with natural resources and having sufficient resources to survive oneself. Second is this very strong psychological tendency to quarrel, which comes from the fact that we fear others. And so we'll see for him, what is the natural reaction to when we fear others is to try to get the upper hand by attacking them first. And third, glory, to gain the praise of others through acts of power. The first, competition, maketh men to invade for gain. The second, for safety, diffidence. We attack people to procure our safety. And the third, glory, for reputation. The first use violence to make themselves masters of other persons' wives, other men's persons, wives, children, and cattle. The second, to defend them. And the third, for trifles, in a word, a smile, a different opinion, or any other sign of undervalue, either direct in their persons or by reflection in their kind, their friends, their nation, their profession, or their name. Hereby it is manifest that during the time men live without a common power to keep them all in awe, which means to put the fear into all of them of being punished, they are in that condition which is called war, and such a war as is of every man against every man. So the natural condition is because of these three principal sources in human nature. It is a state of war, as long as there is not a higher power to keep them all in check. Now he goes on to explain here, I won't go into this, that by war he doesn't mean actual battle. He means war as a tendency, an innate tendency to come into conflict. So we are not at peace unless peace is secured. So even if the soldiers are not actively fighting on the battlefield, perhaps it's night and they're sleeping, or I think on this border with Israel, Lebanon is kind of in perpetual war. Although they may not be fighting, this is what he means. It's not a state of peace, it's a state of war as long as there isn't a secured peace. Because why? Because there are always these natural tendencies that make actual war ready to break out. And now what's the problem with this state of nature? Well, this is the problem. As we've seen, every human being is in fear of every other human being. And so they cannot do anything but attack others and protect themselves and remain uncertain and cause trouble. And so life is very bad in a natural condition. It says, in such a condition, there is no place for industry. There's no work to be done. There's no cooperation, because the fruit thereof is uncertain. No one wants to work because someone else might steal it from them. Consequently, no culture of the earth, no agriculture. That's another culture of the earth, agriculture. So no one grows crops, because you could spend your whole year growing crops and then someone comes and steals it away, or you trade the crops for money and the money is stolen. So what's the point? No navigation, no use of commodities that may be imported by sea, no commodious buildings, no large buildings with lots of rooms, because if you have a big building that you could build, you have to keep all your doors locked and you have to keep people out. So you need a small house instead of a large house. No instruments for moving or removing such things as require much force. No knowledge of the face of the earth. So no navigation again. No knowledge. No account of time. No arts. No letters. No society. And which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death. And the life of man is in this state. That's what this comma tells you to fill that in. is in this state solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. This is one of the most famous, probably one of the most famous statements, undoubtedly one of the most famous statements in all of political theory or philosophy itself, is the Hobbesian view of man's life in a state without society, without a government, is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. It's terrible. Okay, so let's move to the next part. Let him therefore consider within himself when taking... Okay, so in this passage, he's going to explain a little bit, and he's just simply having recourse back to his original method. Remember, the method was, if you want to verify these things, so he didn't talk about it particularly, but now he's going to say that. How do we know that there are these three things within the nature of man? Well, because he believes that if you look within yourself, you'll find all three. And you'll find nothing that counterbalances them. Now, this is the point where many later philosophers disagree with Hobbes, because they think that in a state of, even in the natural condition, human beings might have feelings of sympathy, of love, of things that are not simply sources of warfare and quarrel. They might have a natural sympathy with each other and be able to work together, even without a governmental power. But on Hobbes's view, notice he doesn't have any of those he doesn't believe any of those principles are in human nature. He believes it's simply desiring our own goals, fearing others, and desire for glory. This is the principal things that drive us and move us even in a state of government and of society. Just they're transformed and controlled, right, by this higher power that comes in and uses our fears to control us and keep us from attacking one another. So here he's saying, it's surprising that so many men don't really think that this is true. Just ask yourself, right? In such a condition, there's no... Let him, therefore, consider with himself. Anyone who would doubt this. When taking a journey, he arms himself and seeks to go well accompanied. When going to sleep, he locks his doors. When even in his house, he locks his chests. And this when he knows there be laws and public officers armed to revenge all injuries shall be done to him. What opinion he has of his fellow subjects when he rides armed, of his fellow citizens when he locks his doors, and of his children and servants when he locks his chests? Does he not there as much accuse mankind by his actions as I do with my words? So, if you disagree with Hobbes that there are these principles, these horrible things in human nature, these desires to kill and conquer and master everyone else, then why do you lock your doors? Why do you lock your chests? Why do you carry a gun? Most of us don't carry guns anymore, but in his day, they carried guns. By your actions, you already reveal what you think of other human beings. And why do you think that of other human beings? Because you know yourself that you could do similar things. This is the basis for his idea here. And he says, I'm only stating it outright. You actually accuse them in your actions. But neither of us accuse man's nature in it. And now he's going to explain, you may think that this is accusing man of something horrible, but there's nothing to accuse man of, because this is just the nature of man. This is again Hobbes's idea. There's no good or evil in all of this. It's just the nature of human beings. Good and evil arise in a state, in an actual political state, when there are laws. In a state of nature or in the natural condition, it's all allowed. It's all possible. There's no good and no evil. So neither of us, because of that, neither you by your actions nor me by my words, neither of us accuse man's nature. The desires and other passions of man are in themselves no sin. As this is in no way consonant with medieval Christianity. Men's desires and passions, by their definition, are the sources of sin. Right? Here they are no sin. No more are the actions that proceed from those passions, till they know a law that forbids them. So not until there's a law is there something wrong. which till laws be made they cannot know, nor can any law be made till they have agreed upon the person that shall make it. So there are no laws without a person who has agreed to make that law. So there can be no laws until there is a king or a sovereign. And before that time, there is no distinction between good and evil, because there are no laws. And he says, perhaps you think the state never existed. He says it could exist now, but then he points to North America, the savage people in many places in America, except for the government of small families, the concord whereof dependeth on natural lust, have no government at all, and live at this day in this brutish manner, as I have said before. Right? Then he points to a civil war as another case where one could find a natural condition occurring. Now he's going to draw some. So this is the fundamental idea of all of Hobbes's political theory. It's going to be the basis upon which he justifies government. So this war of every man against every man, this is also consequent. So this also follows that nothing can be unjust. There is no justice. There's no right or wrong. There's no justice. Notions of right and wrong, justice and injustice, here have no place. Where there is no common power, there is no law. Where there is no law, no injustice. Force and fraud are in war the two cardinal virtues. All right. So far from it being the case. It's as far from it being the case that hurting other people and taking their things is wrong. In fact, there are virtues in the state of nature, or in the natural condition. They are the two cardinal virtues are fraud, trickery, and force. Now he says justice and injustice are not found in men's natures. They come from outside, and they relate to the qualities of men in society, not alone, not in solitude. It is consequent also, it follows also, to the same condition that there be no propriety, no dominion, no mine, no thine. Nothing belongs to you, nothing belongs to me, but only that to be every man's that he can get, and for so long as he can keep it. So the notion of this is about property. There's no such thing as property in a state, there's no other conception of property in a natural condition or in a state of nature, except what you have in your hands while you have it in your hands. So there is no, when you look at someone else and they have your child, your wife, your belongings in their hands, you cannot say in a natural state, you have my property, you have my wife. No, when it's in someone else's hands, it is theirs. Because that's all the notion of property there is possession through power. And thus much for the ill condition which men by mere nature is actually placed in, though with a possibility of coming out of it, consisting partly in the passions, partly in his reason. The passions that incline men to peace, so we've talked about war to this point, right? Now he says that what incline men to peace are fear of death, desire of such things as are necessary to commodious living. Notice these are very similar to what we saw before. Diffidence, fear of others, desire for a good living to pursue our ends, and a hope by their industry to obtain them. So these passions are what lead us to peace. In a certain sense, the same things that lead us to war will lead us to peace. Why? Because all that peace and a government really are for Hobbes is a more rational, more reasonable way of pursuing the same ends, namely our goals to preserve ourselves and to protect ourselves from being attacked by others and to gain by our industry more than we could. We are pursuing the same goals by the same, due to the same innate fears and drives in a social state as we do in a state of war. That is not different. What's different in a social state is that we have come up with a more reasonable, rational plan about how to pursue those things, right? And reason suggestive, convenient articles. So reason is the source of government. Nothing else, not God, not tradition, nothing. Reason we sit in this state of nature which is horrendous, brutish, short, terrible. There's we have no hope of leading good lives, living long, retaining our possessions. And we begin to think about this, and we have experience. And we slowly come to the reason itself begins to suggest that there might be ways of doing this in a smarter fashion. And this is where articles of peace come from, right? It's just natural. It comes from reason through experience. The men will eventually desire to quit the state of nature and to pursue a different path. So reason suggesteth convenient articles of peace upon which men may be drawn to agreement. These articles are they which otherwise are called the laws of nature. So reason suggests the laws of nature, right? That sounds, I know, a bit weird, but I explained that in the last video. This is a peculiar way of speaking. But the laws in the state that come from reason and are not in the natural condition, those are called the laws of nature by Hobbes. So these articles, these laws or rules that will follow, they're otherwise called the laws of nature. They are suggested by reason, whereof I shall speak more particularly in the following chapters. So now that's the entire deductive foundation for his political theory. Now in the next sections, he will discuss these various articles, and he will derive one from another as he proceeds. So in this chapter, he's going to talk about the first and second natural laws and of contracts, social contract, covenant, pacts. The first natural law will lead him to the second natural law. And then there will follow 3, 4, 5, 6, 15, 18 natural laws. These will gradually move from the most basic conditions and principles of establishing any state whatsoever, the ones that reason suggests, a way of better arranging our society so that a state of the problems that we find in a condition of nature are no longer so terrible. And he'll go from those most basic conditions through much more complicated conditions that kind of perfect that and establish that form of government. Okay, that's what I want to talk about in this video. So I'll see you later.